My name is Sandra Emmons. I'm 40 years old, and this is the story of how my entire life was dismantled by the man I thought I knew best. For 15 years, Michael and I built what most people would call a safe, ordinary life. We married in our mid-20s, had our daughter Emma and our son Jake before I turned 30, and moved into a modest two-story house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Nothing extravagant, nothing reckless, just steady, predictable, almost boring to outsiders. I used to wear boring like a badge of honor. To me, it meant security. It meant Emma's soccer practices on Saturdays, Jake's baseball games on Sundays, the smell of barbecue in our backyard when neighbors dropped by. It meant Michael's easy laugh at the dinner table when Jake told silly jokes, and the way Emma would roll her eyes but smile anyway. I worked as an accountant at a mid-sized firm. Michael managed the front office of a dental clinic. We weren't rich, but our bills were always paid on time. We had savings for emergencies, even a small lake house 2 hours away, where we spent nearly every summer. That little cabin wasn't much, but it was ours. I thought that was enough. But routines have sharp edges. If you press against them too long, they start to cut. Michael had always been more restless than me. I saw it in the way his eyes lingered on travel magazines at the grocery store, or how his conversations with friends always drifted toward someday plans. Someday we'll see Italy. Someday we'll backpack through Asia. Someday we'll live by the ocean. I used to smile and say someday maybe when the kids are older. I thought he understood. The beginning of the end didn't arrive like a storm. It crept in quietly disguised as something good. 2 years ago, Michael joined a photography club at the community center. He said he wanted a hobby, something creative. I encouraged it. After all he'd been saying, he needed something for himself, and I thought, why not? I even juggled Emma and Jake's schedules so he could make their weekly meetings. That's where he met her, Sienna. I didn't know her at first, not really. Just a name that came up in his stories. Sienna says the light at sunset is best for portraits. Or Sienna showed me how to adjust my camera settings. He'd mention her casually, like she was just another member of the group. But the way his voice changed when he said her name, it unsettled me. Soft, almost reverent. Sienna was everything I wasn't. Wild curls, leather jacket, a history of traveling to more than a dozen countries. No kids. Divorced. She had this philosophy, apparently, life is meant to be lived, not scheduled. At first I thought she was harmless. Michael needed friends, I told myself, and I couldn't begrudge him someone who pushed him to try new things. I even teased him about it one evening while he was scrolling through camera lenses online. So what's she like, this Sienna? I asked, keeping my tone light. He barely glanced up. She's just fun, free. She doesn't worry about things like retirement or savings accounts. She just goes. Must be nice, I said, trying to laugh, but something in my chest tightened. The changes started small. A new leather jacket that didn't quite fit his usual style. A playlist full of music I'd never heard before, edgy loud. Nothing like the jazz or soft rock he used to love. Then he started staying out later, even after the photography meetings ended. A few of us grabbed drinks, he'd say. Or Sienna showed me this cool rooftop downtown. I wanted to believe it was innocent. I wanted to trust him. But every time he came home, glowing with stories about her latest adventure in Costa Rica, her fearless cliff diving in Greece, I felt myself shrinking. The real warning sign came at Emma's soccer game of all places. I was sitting beside him in the bleachers cheering when Emma scored a goal. Michael clapped politely, then turned to me, his face distant. You know what I realized today, he said. What? When Sienna talks about her travels, her eyes light up. When you talk about our lake house trips, it sounds like you're reading off a grocery list. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I thought you liked the lake house, I whispered. We've been going there for years. That's the point, Sandra. The same lake, the same routine, the same everything. Don't you ever want more? I gestured toward Emma, still beaming from her goal. This is more Michael. This is our life. He looked away, shaking his head. Sienna doesn't think like that. She says fear keeps people stuck. That real living means taking risks. I wanted to scream. Instead, I sat in silence, clapping mechanically as Emma's team celebrated. Inside, something cold began to spread. Over the next few months, Sienna became a constant presence in our home. Her opinions, her adventures, her philosophy. Michael compared everything I did to what she would do. Sienna wouldn't waste a Saturday night watching Netflix. Sienna says saving for retirement is letting fear win. Sienna thinks men who settle into routine are cowards. Every word chipped away at the life I thought we shared. I tried to fight back in my own way. suggested we plan a trip to Europe, the very same idea he'd brushed off as too expensive years ago. I signed us up for salsa dance lessons, bought a bright red dress I thought he'd notice. I even browsed motorcycle magazines once, wondering if maybe I was the one failing him. Nothing worked. I was a shadow next to Sienna's blaze. And deep down, I think Michael had already decided where his heart belonged. The night it all shattered is seared into my memory. It was late a Tuesday in October. Michael came home from another club meeting. I was helping Jake with his math homework. When he walked in, his expression grim but determined. "Sandra," he said, voice low, "we need to talk." Jake froze, sensing the tension, then slipped upstairs. Michael sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd planned our wedding, where I'd fed our babies, where we'd lived our entire married life. "See, I can't do this anymore," he said. "I settled too young. I deserve better." The words cut like glass, slicing clean through the woman I thought I was. And in that moment, staring at the man I had built a life with, I realized nothing would ever be the same again. When Michael said those words, "I settled too young, I deserve better," I thought my body would give out. For a second, I actually pressed my palms flat against the kitchen table, grounding myself, afraid I might collapse. 15 years of marriage unraveled in a single sentence. I wanted to argue, to scream, to remind him of everything we had built together, but his eyes were set sharp with a determination I'd never seen before. He wasn't inviting a conversation, he was announcing a verdict. The following days blurred. Michael packed a suitcase with alarming efficiencies, like he had rehearsed this moment 100 times in his head. Clothes, toiletries, a few personal items. He didn't bother with sentiment, no framed family photos, no keepsakes from the kids' early years. He left those behind as if they belonged to a different life. Emma watched from the staircase that night. She was 14, old enough to understand. Her jaw trembled, but she didn't cry. Jake clutched my hand so tightly my fingers went numb. "Where are you going, Dad?" Jake asked. Michael knelt, brushing his hand through Jake's hair. "Just somewhere I can think. Somewhere I can be myself." I swallowed hard, forcing steadiness into my voice. "He's moving in with his friend from photography club." Michael's silence confirmed it. That friend, of course, was Sienna. The first week without him was chaos. Jake asked about his father every morning at breakfast, every night before bed. Emma grew quiet, withdrawing into her room, blasting music through her headphones. I tried to hold everything together, school drop-offs, work, deadlines, grocery shopping, but inside I was hollow. Michael, meanwhile, seemed to flourish. He posted photos on social media, him and Sienna on a rooftop bar. Sienna perched on the back of his new motorcycle, their arms stretched out on some spontaneous road trip. The man who once groaned about traffic on the way to the lake house was suddenly reborn as a free spirit. The comparisons didn't stop just because he'd left. When he came by to pick up the kids for his first weekend visit, he leaned against the doorframe, casual, smug. "You should try it sometime, Sandra. Living a little. Sienna says we waste too much time worrying about responsibilities." I wanted to slam the door in his face. Instead, I smiled, thinly, handed him Jake's overnight bag, and watched as my children disappeared into a car that smelled faintly of leather and perfume. Nights were the worst. I would lie awake in our bed, my bed now staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of our marriage. The wedding vows whispered in a church filled with lilies. The first night in our tiny apartment, eating takeout on the floor because we couldn't afford furniture yet. The way Michael had once looked at me, like I was his entire world. Had all of that been a lie, or had it just expired? One evening, I gathered the courage to ask him. He was dropping the kids off, and for once Sienna wasn't with him. "Michael," I said, catching his arm before he turned away, "was I ever enough for you?" He hesitated, eyes flicking toward Emma and Jake, who were already bounding up the steps. Then he sighed. "You were safe, Sandra. Safe isn't bad, but it's not alive." I think part of me broke permanently in that moment. Not because of what he said, but because I realized he truly believed it. Weeks stretched into months. I tried everything to bridge the gap, to prove I could be alive too. I suggested we take a trip abroad together, just us and the kids, Paris maybe. I even pulled out brochures, highlighted activities. He smirked. "Paris with you would be sightseeing. Paris with Sienna would be living." I signed up for salsa classes at the community center, hoping he'd notice. He laughed when Emma mentioned it. "Since when does Mom dance?" I bought a new dress, something bolder than my usual style. He didn't even blink. No matter what I did, I was measured against Sienna, and I always came up short. The final blow came one night when he dropped the kids off late. Emma stormed past him without a word. Jake lingered in the doorway, uneasy. Michael looked at me, then sighed as though exhausted by my very presence. Sandra, he said, stop trying so hard. You can't compete with her. She makes me feel alive in ways you never did. I'm not coming back. There it was. Final. Irrevocable. I closed the door behind him, my heart pounding but my face calm. Emma was upstairs crying into her pillow. Jake was curled on the couch, hugging a stuffed bear he was far too old for. And me, I stood alone in the kitchen, the house suddenly cavernous, the silence deafening. The man I'd loved for half my life was gone, and in his place stood a Semensker chasing a thrill that would burn us all. I knew then our family had splintered, and nothing would ever return to the way it was. If the night Michael walked out felt like an earthquake, the weeks that followed were the aftershocks. Constant jarring, leaving me unsteady no matter how hard I tried to plant my feet. I had to be both parents now. Every morning I packed lunches, signed permission slips, braided. Emma's hair reminded Jake to grab his science project. I showed up at my accounting job with a smile that fooled my coworkers, then came home to a house that felt 2 sizes too big. The hardest part wasn't Michael's absence. It was his presence, his shadow lingering in the children's questions. Why can't Dad live here? And with Sienna too, Jake asked one night, his little brow furrowed. Because marriage doesn't work that way, I said softly, kissing his forehead. Emma was less naive. At 14, she understood. She stopped asking questions, but she also stopped forgiving. Her eyes hardened when Michael's name came up. She refused to speak to him on the phone, refused to pack her bag on weekends he was scheduled to take them. You can't make me go, she said once, crossing her arms in the kitchen doorway. Emma, he's still your father, I tried, my voice cracking. She shook her head, tears spilling despite her defiance. Not to me. I didn't push after that. Michael, meanwhile, seemed to grow younger every day. When he came to pick up Jake, he looked tan, his hair longer styled in a way I'd never seen before. He wore leather jackets, designer sunglasses. He carried himself like a man reborn. Sienna was always nearby, leaning against his car, laughing too loudly, kissing him in front of Jake as though daring me to object. I didn't. I stood in the doorway and waved goodbye, my face a mask, my hands trembling at my sides. The neighbors noticed. Friends whispered. At school events, I felt eyes on me, pity and curiosity mingling like smoke. Everyone knew Michael had left his wife and children for the woman from his photography club. Everyone knew I'd been traded in for an adventure. And yet I couldn't allow myself to fall apart. So I created new routines, small rituals to anchor us. Friday night pizza and movie marathons on the couch. Sunday morning pancakes shaped like animals. Homework spread across the kitchen table while I chopped vegetables for dinner. At first, the kids resisted Emma retreating into silence, Jake asking why things couldn't just go back. But slowly, painfully, those little rituals began to stick. We were becoming a different kind of family, stitched together from broken pieces. But even in the comfort of those new rhythms, Michael's world kept intruding. Emma came home one weekend, her face pale. She threw her overnight bag onto the floor and hissed, "I'm not going back there." I rushed to her side. What happened? She blinked rapidly, fighting tears. Sienna was screaming at Dad. She called him pathetic. Then she looked at me and said, "Kids ruin everything." Dad just stood there. He didn't even defend me. My stomach twisted. A week later, Jake told me, matter-of-factly, Sienna doesn't like when we're around. She says it messes up their vibe. He said it innocently, not understanding the cruelty of the words he repeated. I wanted to rage to call Michael and demand answers, but instead I bit my tongue. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't my fight anymore. He had chosen his path. I just had to protect the children from the fallout. Still, the cracks in his new life were visible. The first time I really saw it, was during a drop-off. Michael's eyes looked sunken dark circles beneath them. He'd lost weight, not the healthy kind. When I asked if he was okay, he snapped, "I'm fine. Better than fine." But his voice wavered. I watched him drive away with Sienna in the passenger seat, her hand on his knee, her laughter cutting through the night air. For the first time since he'd left, I didn't feel jealousy. I felt pity. The turning point came 8 months later. It was a Thursday afternoon. I was buried in spreadsheets at work when my phone rang. Michael's number. When I answered, all I heard was sobbing. "Sandra," he choked. "I know I hurt you, but I made a mistake, a huge mistake. Please, can we talk?" I sat frozen in my office chair, staring at the gray walls, listening to the man who had once broken me, now broken himself. "Talk about what?" I asked, my tone flat. "I want to come home. I miss the kids. I miss you. I miss everything." Home. That word sliced through me. "This isn't your home anymore, Michael," I whispered. He begged, words tumbling out between sobs. Promises to change, to try counseling, to finally take that trip to Paris I'd always wanted. But as I listened, I realized something chilling. He didn't want me. He wanted the life he'd abandoned, the safety net, the stability. And that life no longer existed. I ended the call. My hands shook, but my resolve was steel. That night, after I tucked Jake into bed and kissed Emma's forehead, I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the ghosts of our past. And for the first time in 2 years, I felt a Semmensge powerful calm. Michael had left us chasing fire. Now he was the one burned. And I was still standing. After Michael's desperate call, I thought maybe, just maybe, he would retreat quietly, lick his wounds, and let me and the children heal. But that wasn't who he had become. He started reaching out constantly. At first it was late-night texts, long paragraphs about how much he missed Emma's laughter, Jake's hugs, my cooking. Then came the phone calls, pleading, bargaining, promising. Sandra, we can fix this. I swear I'll change. Sienna isn't who I thought she was. She's destroying me. Sometimes I hung up. Sometimes I listened in silence until his voice broke. But never, not once, did I tell him what he wanted to hear. Because I knew the truth, he didn't want me back. He wanted the life he had so carelessly torched. The children noticed the shift too. Emma grew angrier, more vocal. One evening after a visit, she slammed her bedroom door so hard the frame rattled. What happened? I asked, knocking gently. Her muffled voice cracked through tears. Dad let her call me useless. Right in front of him. He didn't even say anything, Mom. He just stared at the floor. I pressed my forehead against the door, my chest aching. You don't have to go if you don't want to, sweetheart. I'm not, she whispered. Not ever again. Jake lasted longer, but even he began to resist. He came home one weekend, quiet, chewing his lip. When I asked what was wrong, he finally blurted, Sienna told Dad he has to choose her or us. The words hit me like a physical blow. My son looked so small, so unsure. I pulled him into my arms and whispered, You will never have to fight for your father's love, not with me. But the truth was, Michael had already chosen. When he showed up at drop-offs, he looked hollow, his face drawn. He'd lost more weight, and his eyes darted nervously as if he were afraid of Sienna overhearing. Once, while waiting in the driveway, Emma whispered, He looks like a ghost. She wasn't wrong. Then came the night he showed up at my door drunk. It was past midnight. I woke to pounding on the door, my heart racing. I rushed down the stairs and peeked through the peephole, Michael swaying his hair matted with sweat, his voice slurred. Sandra, please, just let me in. I don't belong there. I belong here. I cracked the door just enough to step outside, pulling my robe tight. You need to leave, I hissed, glancing upstairs, praying the kids hadn't woken. He reached for me, desperation twisting his features. She hates me. She screams. She throws things. I jerked back. Stop. You made your choice. Now live with it. For a second, something dark flashed in his eyes. Then his shoulders sagged and he stumbled back toward his car. I locked the door, leaned against it, and let silent tears stream down my face. From that night on, things unraveled quickly. News trickled back to me through the grapevine. Sienna had been seen screaming at him in public, throwing a drink in his face at a downtown bar. A neighbor mentioned loud fights at all hours, broken glass, echoing through thin apartment walls. At first, I brushed it off as gossip. But then Emma returned from school one afternoon, eyes blazing. Mom, did you know Dad got kicked out of Sienna's apartment last week? People are talking about it everywhere. I closed my laptop, my chest tightening. Where did you hear that? Everyone knows. Her neighbors posted about it online. I didn't ask for details. I didn't want to know. And then the inevitable happened. Michael called me from an unknown number. His voice was raw, trembling. Sandra, I can't do this anymore. Please, just give me one more chance. We can go to counseling. We can take that trip you always wanted. I'll be different this time. Something inside me snapped. Different. I repeated, my voice steady but cold. Michael. I suggested Paris 3 times over the years. You said it was a waste of money. And now suddenly, it's your grand solution. He was silent for a long time. Finally, he whispered, I've learned so much about myself, about what I want. And what I want is my family back. I closed my eyes. No. What you want is the comfort you threw away. But that life is gone, and so am I. I hung up before he could respond. From then on, his desperation turned to persistence, unwelcome, suffocating persistence. He waited outside my office one evening, leaning against my car. My coworkers walked past, whispering. Sandra, please, he begged. Don't do this to me. I clenched my keys into my hand. I didn't do this to you, Michael. You did this to yourself. His sister cornered me at Jake's baseball game. He's miserable, Sandra. You have to forgive him. He's family. I stared at her, my voice low but sharp. He wasn't family when he walked out on us. He doesn't get to be family when he decides it's convenient. Her face flushed. Isn't forgiveness part of being a good Christian? I turned away. So is protecting my children. But Michael didn't stop. He called, texted, begged. And I realized his world was collapsing and he was clinging to me like driftwood in a storm. But I wasn't his lifeline anymore. I was the shore he had turned his back on, and now the tide was dragging him out to sea. It didn't happen all at once. Michael's life didn't explode in a single blaze. It decayed slowly like fruit left too long in the sun, until one day it was nothing but rot. I saw it first in the way Emma and Jake shifted. Emma was 16 now, and she had stopped going to his place entirely. Legally, I couldn't force her. When the custody schedule came up, she crossed her arms and said flatly, "If the court wants to drag me out of this house, fine. Otherwise, I'm not going." Jake lasted longer, still clinging to hope. He'd pack his bag dutifully, climb into Michael's car, and return 2 days later with dark eyes and a heavy silence. One night he whispered, as I tucked him in, "Dad doesn't want me around anymore. Sienna says I ruin their fun." I pulled him close, my throat burning. "Jake, you are never a ruin. You are the best thing in this world." He nodded, but I could see he didn't believe me, not yet. The whispers around town grew louder. Sienna's drinking her fights with Michael in public. The police called to their apartment more than once. At first I dismissed it as gossip, but then the proof came. Michael's boss at the dental office called me one afternoon, his voice careful. "Sandra, I don't mean to involve you, but Michael hasn't been himself. He's missing shifts, showing up late, distracted. We're worried." I thanked him politely, hung up, and sat at my desk in silence. Michael, the man who once scolded me for forgetting to pay a utility bill on time, was now unraveling in plain sight. The collapse hit in a tidal wave 8 months after his midnight visit to my door. Michael called me again, his voice shaky. "Sandra, she's gone. Sienna. She threw me out. I'm living out of my car." I closed my eyes, inhaling slowly. "I'm sorry, Michael. I really am. But this isn't my problem anymore." "You don't understand," his voice cracked. "She drained my accounts. She stole my camera gear. I have nothing. Please let me come home." Home, that word again. "This isn't your home anymore," I said softly, firmly. "It hasn't been for a long time." He sobbed into the phone, his words a slurry of apologies, promises, desperation. I listened, my hand trembling, until finally I whispered, "I can't save you." Then I hung up. But Michael didn't give up. He showed up at Emma's school, waiting by the gates. He cornered me at the grocery store, his voice raw. He even sent letters handwritten messy, stained with what I suspected were tears or liquor. "Sandra, please, I know I failed you, but don't punish me forever. Don't punish the kids. Let me come back." I stopped reading them after the 5th one. The turning point for me, the moment my pity finally hardened into indifference, came at Jake's baseball game. Michael arrived uninvited, staggering slightly, his eyes bloodshot. He sat in the bleachers across the field, shouting too loudly when Jake hit the ball, clapping off beat. Parents stared, whispering. After the game, Jake came running to me, his face pale. "Mom, he's embarrassing me. Please make him stop." I held my son close and turned to Michael. "You need to leave," I said quietly but firmly. His face crumpled. "I just want to see my boy." "You're not helping him," I whispered. "You're hurting him." He opened his mouth to argue, but then Emma appeared beside me, her arms crossed, her glare sharp as glass. "Go," she snapped. "You don't belong here anymore." Michael flinched, like she'd slapped him. For the first time, I saw shame flicker across his face. He left without another word. By the end of that year, the children had made their choice. Emma moved in with me full-time. Jake followed soon after, officially asking to adjust the custody schedule. The judge approved without hesitation. Michael hadn't been showing up consistently anyway. When I told him, he cried. "They're all I have left, Sandra. Please don't take them from me." "They made their choice, Michael," I said gently. "You made yours a long time ago." Friends, neighbors, even his own sister tried to guilt me. "He's suffered enough," she pleaded. "Don't you think it's time to forgive?" I stared at her, exhausted. Forgiveness isn't the same as welcoming him back. I forgave him the moment I realized I no longer cared. She didn't understand. Few people did. But I didn't need them to. And then came the final blow, the one even he couldn't outrun. Sienna was arrested, DUI assault possession. During processing, the police uncovered warrants from another state. The gossip spread like wildfire, so did the judgment. Michael lost his job within weeks, his reputation shattered. He moved back into his parents' house at 42 years old, a shell of the man he once was. Emma refused to speak his name. Jake stopped asking questions. And me. I sat at the kitchen table one night, the same table where Michael had once told me I wasn't enough, and realized the truth. He hadn't destroyed me. He had freed me. I didn't expect peace to come. Not after the chaos, the betrayal, the months of unraveling. But it did, quietly like a sunrise. By the time Michael hit rock bottom, I had already climbed out of the pit he left me in. The kids were thriving. Emma, now 17, had her eyes set on college. She filled out applications with the same determination she once poured into her soccer games. Jake, 15, was the star of his varsity baseball team, his laughter returning in bursts that reminded me of the boy he used to be. And me, I had rebuilt myself, piece by jagged piece. The nights weren't sleepless anymore. The house no longer felt cavernous, it felt like ours. I'd been promoted at work, started attending pottery classes at the community center. The same classes Michael once mocked as boring. My hands shaping clay became a kind of therapy molding, something broken into something whole. The last time I saw Michael outside of Kid Logistics was 6 months ago. I was at the grocery store scanning the cereal aisle when I felt someone watching me. I turned, and there he was. But he wasn't the man I had married. He wasn't even the man who had left me. His hair was unkempt, his shoulders slumped. He looked older, worn, like life had chewed him up and spit him out. His hands trembled as he reached for me. "Sandra," he said, voice cracked. "Please, just 5 minutes." I studied him carefully. My chest was steady, my heartbeat calm. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even sad. "I don't hate you, Michael," I said. He blinked in surprise. "You don't—" "I did once, but hate requires caring, and I don't care anymore." He flinched like I'd struck him. "Don't say that. We had 15 years together. That has to mean something." "It does," I replied softly. "It means I know what I won't accept anymore. It means I know my worth." His eyes filled with tears. "I've changed. I've grown. I want my life back." I shook my head. "No, Michael. You don't want me. You want the safety you threw away. You killed the man I loved when you told me I was something you settled for. That life doesn't exist anymore. Neither does the woman who would have taken you back." I left him standing in the aisle, clutching a box of cereal like it was an anchor. That was the last time we spoke beyond arranging visits for Jake.
Same.
Looking back, I realized something important. Michael was right about one thing. We were wrong for each other. But not because I was boring or safe. We were wrong because I valued loyalty, commitment, stability, while he valued excitement, novelty. The illusion of greener grass. He thought he was trading up when he left me for Sienna. What he really did was trade a woman who loved him for a woman who used him. Stability for chaos. Respect for humiliation. A family for a cautionary tale. The cruelest part. He still thinks the problem was Sienna, that he picked the wrong woman. He never understood the truth. The real problem was that he was the kind of man who could throw away 15 years of marriage for any woman. And I learned something too. I'm not boring. I'm steady. I'm not safe. I'm dependable. And those aren't weaknesses. They're the very things that someone worthy of me will treasure. Until that person comes, I'm enough on my own. This summer, the kids and I are finally going to Paris. Emma's already making a list of art museums. Jake is obsessed with seeing the Eiffel Tower. I've booked the tickets, something I once thought we'd never afford, never manage. But now it feels possible. More than possible, it feels perfect. Because we're going together as a family. Our family. I may have lost a husband, but I found myself. And that's the beginning of everything.